Is that a max or min? This is a min. I find I still sometimes have to draw that. And then draw a parabola that has a max. Well, it has a negative a value, if you remember what that is. All right, let's review the learning goals for today. So today, we want to remind ourselves how to complete the square so that we can find the vertex. We want to interpret the vertex to be a max or a min. And we're going to understand the process of completing the square and how it relates to a perfect square trinomial, PST. And we're going to do a word problem. Oh, we love those. All right. So recall from grade 10 that a quadratic function is a function where the highest exponent on the variable is what? A 2. Okay, so x squared means we're working with a quadratic. Please. Thank you. Now, this is important. We have various forms of writing a quadratic. What is the name of this form? This is called standard form. And what is this one called? Vertex form. Good. And each of them are helpful in different ways. Okay. What can you find from the vertex form? You got it, the vertex. Anyone know what you can find from standard form? Standards. You can find the y-intercept, and you can always find the a value, right? So these are the two forms we usually encounter. There is another way called, is it the factored form? It's the one where you can find the two x-intercepts. All right. Yes, absolutely. So let's review vertex form first. Do you remember we had these letters A, H, and K? So what does the A represent? Two things. Kiara. Excellent. So vertical. I write vert as a short form. Okay. So if A is greater than 1, is that a stretch or compression? It's a stretch. Leave some space because there's more. If A is less than 1, that's a compression. So if it's like 0.2 or 1/3, that would mean your parabola is compressed. Now, the second thing is if A is less than 0, i.e. if it's negative. This means, what does your parabola, show me with your arms, what does your parabola look like when it's a negative A? You got it. It's an upside down parabola, or, this is important, Greg, you gotta stop. Thank you. This is important. So here we have the x-axis, here we have the y-axis. A parabola with a positive a value looks like that. A parabola with a negative a value looks like that. We call this a reflection in the x-axis. It's as if the x-axis is like a pair of monkey bars, and you flip over it, you reflect on it. Okay, so the a value means a reflection in x-axis. So again, you're noticing certain terminology being used. Okay, next, what does the h represent? You're a parabola. Actually, you need to do this with your hand. Make a parabola with your hand. What does the h do? Yes, it is the horizontal shift. Or translation. Horizontal shift or translation, you might have heard the two terms. So let's remind ourselves, because this one's the one that's tricky. If you have something like x minus 4 squared, is that left or right? We're going 4 to the right. So our h value is actually positive 4. If I have x plus 3, for example, which direction is the parabola moving in? In the negative direction. So that would mean 3 to the left. So when it's inside the brackets, we actually do the opposite. And then we have that k value. So the k represents a vertical translation or a vertical shift. And the k value is easy. If k is bigger than 0, we shift up. If k is less than 0, i.e. it's negative, the parabola shifts down. And so we can use these values to find the vertex, right? So the vertex is your h. That's because it's horizontal. That's your x value. And then because the k moves it vertically along the y-axis, the value of k becomes the coordinate of the vertex. So let's do an example. If I have an equation that's like y equals x plus 5 squared minus 7, the vertex, and we can write vertex like this, where you write the letter v, and then you just write the coordinates. Okay, so take a guess what the vertex is. Okay, what is the x value? It's going to be negative 5. What is the k value? It's also negative 7. Then we have this term called the axis of symmetry. So basically, you can fold your parabola along the axis of symmetry and it folds onto itself perfectly, right? And it's a vertical line. And if you remember, our vertical lines, Greg, x equals or y equals? Okay, so because along this line, which value is never changing? Is it the x or the y along this vertical line? The y is changing. Look, y is 10, 5, 4, negative 1, negative 2. It's the x value that doesn't change. So if you want a vertical line, you have to write x equals, and it goes through the vertex. So it's going to be x equals h. So whatever the x value of your vertex is, that's going to be your axis of symmetry equation. Okay, so that's a vertex form. Yeah.
Sorry, why was h negative 5 again?
Okay, so in this equation, in this form of the vertex form, do you see how there's actually a minus as part of the form? Okay, so when you have an equation like this, y equals x, I need the minus there. So it's, do you see what I did there?
Yeah.
Yeah, so this negative is just a part of the formula, okay? So if the overall, if it's plus inside the bracket, it's actually telling me that the h is a negative 5, okay? Because the negative has to be there as a part of the formula. Great question. Let's move on to standard form. So in standard form, there are no brackets, okay? And we have an equation that looks similar to this. So let's give one example. So if we have y equals negative 2x squared plus 4x minus 10. In this case, let's just write down what are our a, b, and c. And we just take the coefficients. So in this case, a is negative 2, b is 4, c is negative 10. Okay, so you change nothing. You'll often find that we flip things from positive to negative when they are inside a bracket, like the h is inside a bracket. Now, using the standard form, we can find the y-intercept, we can find the a value, but that's it. That's not much. So what we like to do is we like to convert from standard into vertex, and we do this by completing the square. So I like to do a little visual. Standard to vertex form. And how do I get from one to the other? Well, I use the process called complete the square. Okay, so why do we do completing the square? Well, we do it so that we can get our equation in vertex form, so that I can tell you what the vertex is. So before we do a full completing the square, let's practice the good old PST. So a PST is a perfect square trinomial. So it is a trinomial that you can factor into two identical binomials. So all those trinomials that I gave you for the warm-up were all perfect square trinomials. Okay? And so how do we factor one? Well, it's going to end up looking like this, right? It's going to be one binomial that is squared because they're both going to be identical. And so in order to do that, you take the square root of a. So the square root of x squared is just x. You take the square root of c. What's the square root of 1? Well, it's just 1. And then you take that middle sign. So if it's a plus, then it's a plus. Now, I didn't really touch the middle term. And the only thing I do with the middle term is I use it to make sure that it truly is a perfect square trinomial. So if I go x times 1 and then double it, does it give me 2x? It does give me 2x, right? X times 1 is 1, doubled is 2x. Great. So let's practice one more. If I give you go ahead and factor that as a perfect square trinomial and check. And then my check. Got it. Questions? Yeah. Could be. I know some people teach it that way. I don't. So I'm not sure. Did Mr. Matvienko teach you last year? Because I know he does it that way. So you might want to ask him. It is?
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah.
What do you know? Like what the word would be for the rule, like for it being like that, but like in words of is it like square the first, like double it or whatever? Like,
Square first term. No. Square root. Exactly. Square root first term. Square root third term, use sign of middle term. So folks, as I'm making these notes, if some of these notes are redundant for you, like you're like, oh, I don't need to write them, then don't, right? Don't feel like you have to write everything down. Or if you have more notes that you want to add, please add them. Yeah.
When we do a standard one, is it only going to be perfect squares, or are we going to get like?
No, they will not only be perfect squares. Yes. Which course did you take? Okay. What value of C would make this quadratic a perfect square trinomial? Okay. So do we have a formula? Do we have a formula? Oh yeah, we do. All right. So we take so in this case, we take the middle term and we kind of do the opposite. Okay, so before I multiplied it to check, well, let's take the middle term and now let's divide it by 2 and let's square it. So negative 20 divided by 2 squared gives me what? 100. Negative 10 squared, 100. And there is a formula for this one. This is where you take b divided by 2 and square it, and that gives you c. And this is what we need to do to complete the square. So let's see, does that work for this one? If we have y equals x squared minus 20x plus 100. Now notice the last term is always positive. Go ahead and factor that as a perfect square trinomial. Yeah.
Will that formula still work if a is not equal to 1?
Eventually. Because we first factor out that a. Yep. Okay, square root of x squared is just x. Square root of 100 is 10. Middle term has a minus, add a minus. Does it work? It does. Okay, so here is a nice one to remember. And this is part of completing the square. All right, so let's do it. This is Mustafa's question. Will it always just be beautiful? No, because that would be boring. So let's take a question in which we must complete the square, where we have an a value, and where it's not a perfect square trinomial. And yes, you've got steps. It's beautiful. Okay. So here is the quadratic that we will complete the square for. What form is it in? Standard. And what do I want to get it into if I'm doing completing the square? Vertex. All right. So step 1, group the terms containing x. So what I mean by this, I'm just going to rewrite it. 3x squared minus 12x plus 11. So step 1 just basically says draw brackets around the 2 terms that have an x. Now the second step, Liam, here says factor out the coefficient of x squared. What is the coefficient? No, it's just negative 3. I'm not looking for the common factor. The common factor is negative 3x. I'm just looking to factor out the negative 3. So we're dividing both of those terms by negative 3. So the negative 3 is canceled out. And now negative 3 by negative 3 is just 1. So now I've got x squared. Negative divided by negative is positive 4x plus 11. That's step 2. Definitely not vertex form yet. All I did is I factored out whatever was in front of x squared. If you don't have a coefficient, if the coefficient is 1, then you skip this step. Okay, and now we do the big complete the square thing. Woohoo! Let's write down this formula here so we don't forget. B divided by 2 all squared. That's how we get the C value. And so if we look at the form at the equation that we have so far, we have an okay. Inside our bracket here, we have the A part, we have the B part, we don't have the C of completing the squares of a standard form, right? To have a perfect square trinomial, we need to have the ABC. So we need to create the C. Okay, how do I do that? Well, I'm going to use this formula. Okay, so I'm going to take, it's here. I take the middle term. What is the middle term? What is the B term? 4. I take the 4. What do I do to it? Divide by 2 and square it. 4 divided by 2 is 2. Squared is 4. Now that I have a C term, I can add it to my equation, but I can't just add a number, a random number to an equation. I need to also subtract it so that overall I'm just adding 0, right? I'm not actually changing the equation. But I had to put the 4 there so that I can have a perfect square trinomial, right? So we have to add and subtract that C value that we found. Okay, so let's write down what we have so far. Yes?
Why is the positive 11 not C?
Great question. Because that doesn't make it a perfect square trinomial. Because positive 11 is not a perfect square. You can't take a square root of it, right? Okay, so let's write out what we've got so far. Now we do have a perfect square trinomial in there, right? We made it. This is our PST. Hooray. So instead of writing that as a trinomial, we can write it as a binomial squared. So watch. Okay, so we're going to say, okay, it's x, it's a 2, it's a plus. Now I've got a second set of brackets now because I still have that negative 4. I can't just throw out the negative 4. Reason being that I have this A value, this negative 3, and this negative 3 is being multiplied by this, and it's multiplying the negative 4. So for me to remove the negative 4, okay, I must multiply it by the negative 3. So I have to go negative 4 times negative 3. It has to be multiplied by the A value. Okay, now I can drop that second bracket. And I'll multiply. This is a common mistake that students forget. When they are removing that negative C value, that negative 4 from the bracket, you forget to multiply it by what's in front of the bracket. And then my final simplification. I showed many steps here. Some of you will want to skip steps. That's great. Now we are in vertex form, and as such, we can find the vertex. Let's write it down. What is the vertex in this case? Yeah. Yes. Is that good? Okay, so go ahead and write down the vertex. So because the H is inside the bracket, I have to take the off. Sorry, let me give you a moment. I can see I've gone a bit too fast. Yeah.
Why'd you draw a negative this towards no positive?
This?
Yeah.
So when you're taking the -4 outside of the bracket, you have to multiply by this -3. Yeah. Okay, and my vertex is -2, positive 23. All right. Let's try one when we have decimals inside in the equation. Okay. Okay, so we are asked to find the maximum or minimum value. So step 1, I just write out the standard form equation. And I will follow the steps above to help me remember what to do first. So the first thing I did is I grouped together the two terms that have an x. Bracket, bracket. Then I factored out the a term. So I'm going to divide everything by 0.3. And here you can use a calculator. -2.4 divided by 0.3, is it 8? Is it 8?
It's 8.
Great. But notice I did not divide the 7.3, right? Because that's outside the brackets. Okay, and now we create a perfect square trinomial. So we take that a term, we take the b term, the -8, you divide it by 2 and square it. -8 divided by 2 and squared. 16. Okay, then I add 16 and subtract 16, always in that order. Okay, we've got a perfect square trinomial situation. We got a PST on our hands. That's excellent. So let's do this step in 2 steps in 1. So I'm going to first take the PS, factor the perfect square trinomial. So square root of x squared is just x. Square root of 16 is 4. And then the middle term has a minus, so the binomial gets a minus. Now remember, when you remove the -16 from the bracket, what will you multiply it by? -16 times 0.3, which, I don't know, you tell me. 4.8? -4.8, beautiful. So minus 4.8, I was going to say that, plus 7.3. Okay, and so we have our vertex form. Is it 2.5? Thank you. Okay, we can find the vertex. 4, 2.5. And then what do I do, folks? Am I done? It's beautiful. Am I done? No, Miss Sly, read the question that you highlighted, right? This is why I was offering highlighters during the test so that you can highlight the question as you read it. Oh, yeah. Find the maximum or minimum value of the function. Oh, I didn't answer the question yet. So, does our parabola have a max or min? Show me with your hand, what does the parabola look like? Okay, if it's like this, is it a max or min? Min. It's the minimum value that it gets to. Okay, good. So we can say min value at, we know that because the a value is positive, so that means the parabola opens up. Right, so it is a compressed parabola, but it's still positive, right? So if the a value is 0.3, it opens up, but it's like really slowly opening up. Okay, but there is a minimum value. And let's state, so it's at 4, 2.5, but which one is the minimum? Is it the 4 or the 2.5? Excellent. Yeah, because that's how low does it go? Well, that's the y value, right? So we can say y min equals 2.5. Yeah.
When you see when we do the PST plus 16 and minus 16,
Yeah.
that's where you kind of lost the power turns to 4.8. I don't really know what you're doing.
So when we take this minus 16 out, you have to multiply it by this number because this number is in front of the bracket. It's saying 0.3 times everything inside. And so we want to take this negative 16 out of the bracket. So in order to do that, you have to multiply it. Okay? Great question. All right, folks. I know I can feel, I think. Okay, tell me, do we have one or two more questions in us? One, right? Yeah. Yeah, so we're going to leave the revenue to Monday. Okay, so that means for your homework, don't do word problems. Okay? But let's do one more completing the square, and in this case we are going to have a fraction. And don't be scared, you know what to do. It's just going to be a bit ugly, okay? So what are we finding in this question? That's right. And I'm going to put a square around it so that I don't forget to actually state the answer because I hate losing half a mark when I do an awesome job, but I don't answer the question. Ooh, look at this function. This one looks weird. Y equals 5x minus 3x squared. What? What do we need to do? You got to rewrite it. So we change the order so that it's in the form of, in standard form, right? So the x squared term must go first. Now, what is my c value? What is it? That's right. It's 0. I'm just not going to write 0. But yeah, it's okay. We can do this. It just means that the parabola crosses the y-axis at the origin. So we follow the same steps. Now note, do not convert to decimals. You're really going to want to do it. Don't do it. Okay, step 1. It might feel redundant, but I'm going to draw brackets around the two x terms. Step 2 is to factor out the a value. What's the a value? Yeah, does negative 3 go into 5 nicely? No, it doesn't. And so what we're saying is we're going to divide both terms by negative 3. right? So the negative 3 comes out. And so x squared is just x squared. Beautiful. This is why we do this. But the b term now becomes 5 over 3. I don't love it, but I can deal with it. Yeah? Yeah. Yeah, that's right. What happened to the negative, Miss Sly? I don't know. I just didn't like it. Just got rid of it. Actually, I want it to be blue. Okay, now notice I didn't close the brackets because I'm going to continue working. So let's find our C value. Okay, C we know is B divided by 2 all squared. Okay, so that means I have to go negative 5 over 3 divided by 2. I'm going to show you how to do this in a nice and easy and painless way. Make 2 into a fraction. How do you make 2 into a fraction? 2 over 1. Do I know how to do this? Yeah, you got it. Look at Liam. Liam, show us. That's right. Reciprocal. Okay, negative 5 over 3 times 1/2. So it's like we're halving it. Well, what does that give me? Gives me negative 5 over 6. Now, do you see what changed? It was the denominator, and we made the denominator bigger. We multiplied the denominator by 2. So you can skip all this work if you're like, oh yeah. So if I'm halving a fraction, I'm multiplying the denominator by 2. Or if you're like, I don't want to remember that, I want to follow this process, then that's what you do. Okay. So, however, we also need to square it. So you square the numerator, you square the denominator. What's negative 5 squared? What's 6 squared? Okay, I could do that, right? And so now I add 25 over 36 and subtract 25 over 36. That was the hardest part, believe it or not. So just follow the colors. Like note, like I try to color code it so that you can see where things are coming from. Okay. And this might be a part that you're like, I need to rewatch this video part of the lesson. Yeah. Because I'm dividing it by 2. So I had to make, so when you divide it by 2, you have to make the 2 into a fraction, 2 over 1. Okay, do I have a PST here? Yeah, I do. This is my PST, believe it or not. Okay. So we can do the first term. What's the square root of x? X of x squared is just x. Is it going to be a plus or minus in the middle? Okay. Okay. And now we have to take the square root of this term. Can we do it? Yeah. Have we done it? We actually have. What is the square root of 25 over 36? It's 5 over 6. I have it already. I did the math already. I don't even have to do it again. Okay. 5 over 6. And then what's the last little bit? We have to take that negative 25. Okay, I want to move this thing. I have to take this negative 25 out of the bracket. Right? So as I'm removing it from the bracket, what do I multiply it by? Yes, I'm going to go times negative 3. So let's do that work on the side. Or can I do it on the side? Or sure? No, maybe I'll just do this. Negative 25 over 36 times -3. And if you want, make the -3 a fraction. Actually, I'm going to make that -3 green so you see where it came from. And I'll just make it into a fraction so I can multiply the numerators and the denominators. So minus times minus is positive. 25 times 3 is 75. 36 times 1 is 36. Do you think you can reduce it? Oh, we can. What can we divide by, Ben? Yeah, we can divide everything by 3. Yeah, so 75 divided by 3 is 25. 36 divided by 3 is 12. So yes, is this a review of grade 10? Yes, but this is a review of like the almost hardest lesson of grade 10, right? Yeah, the hardest lesson would have been the revenue question, which we will leave for Monday when we're bright and ready to go. Yeah. So I divided everything. I reduced it by 3 to reduce the fraction. You know how you want the numbers to be the smallest possible? So I'm like, oh, each of those can be divided by 3. Folks, other questions? Marley. No, it's not rise over run, but I will remind you, we will do a lesson where I'm reviewing how to graph vertex form. It's the step method, if that says anything to you. Yeah, Greg? Pardon? Oh, yeah, I didn't answer the question. Miss Sly. Okay, is the parabola right way up or upside down? Upside down. So, yes, Greg is correct. It is a max value at, what's the vertex? Oh, it's so ugly. Positive 5/6 times 25/12. Wouldn't that be fun graphing it? No, it would not. And so we have y max equals 25/12. Folks, what is that approximately? Give me a decimal. 25/12. Is it 10? Is it 2? Is it 3? A million? It's about 2, right? 25 divided by 12 it's about 2. It's a little bit more than 2, right? Was that fun? Is your energy still high? We had that great energy at the beginning of class. Oh, I'm so sorry. All right, so for homework, don't do the word problems. Okay, and I will stop the recording.